Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I want to thank Stephen for inviting me to speak here and all of you for being here to listen. Am I supposed to use this one or the other one? Oh, that one works. So this is actually my first time opening a conference, which, by the way, as Stephen mentioned, we're joined here via live stream by the thousands of people that registered to attend online. So no pressure. So hello to everyone who's joining us here in person and also via live stream. I would like to personally welcome all of you to HackFest 2023. Today I'll be talking about the important and irreplaceable role that offensive security research plays in the cybersecurity industry. So a little bit about me, as Stephen mentioned, my name is Valentina, aka Chompy, which is my hacker handle. I am a security researcher and I mainly specialize in exploit development, reverse engineering, and vulnerability research. And I've been working professionally in the industry for about just under 6 years. Next week is my 6-year anniversary, actually. And in other industries, it might be unusual for somebody that has less than 6 years of experience to keynote a conference that is ran by a company that is highly respected and trusted for technical courses and certifications and charges a healthy amount for them. But in cybersecurity, we count our years of experience in dog years. So in my 42-year-long career, I've had the opportunity to hack on a lot of targets and I've seen some things. My favorite targets happen to be kernels, Windows, Linux, and also I like mobile exploitation, Android, and I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, anything with a ripe attack surface. So when Steve asked me to do this talk, I spent a long time contemplating on what I wanted to talk about. I've done a few talks before, and I'm used to doing highly technical talks about a very specific topic, like some kernel subsystem or other unique attack surface. But I'm told that that doesn't actually make for a good keynote or not appropriate for a keynote. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what insight do I actually have to offer as someone that specializes in exploit development that isn't some very niche exploit technique that, let's be honest, will probably be patched by this time next year. And so I've been doing talks and public research for a few years now, and I strive to make my research understandable and accessible to a wider technical audience, not just other security researchers. And as a result, something that I've noticed is that a lot of the questions that I get after a talk or after I release a blog post or a piece of research, most of them, or over half of the questions that I get, are about me and my personal experience in cybersecurity, and not about the research itself. And you wouldn't think it, but sometimes those questions are more difficult to answer than the technical questions about the research. Questions like, how did you get into cybersecurity? Or what programming language do I have to learn to know how to hack? Those questions are easy. But questions like, I want to do offensive security research like you. I like writing exploits. Should I invest more time in getting better at these skills? Or is the industry moving too fast to have them still be relevant 3 years from now? What are my employment options, and how do I reconcile my own goals and motivations to who and what pays me to do offensive security work? And these are some really loaded questions that I feel a personal responsibility to answer thoughtfully, even though I don't have a clear answer on them entirely. And I wanted to reflect on them for myself and others as well. So what is offensive security research? The way that I'm defining it for this talk, it's anything and everything that is involved with discovering and exploiting vulnerabilities, but also includes research that contributes to the building of offensive tools and capabilities. But there are some dilemmas involved when starting offensive work. It's often seen as glamorous or cool, so it attracts outsiders, and the role is attractive to newcomers, and everybody's trying to figure out, how do I become a hacker? How do I get into offense? Even current technical talent wants to transition into offense. But obviously the reality of the work is sometimes less alluring than the marketing. And it's also no secret that offensive security work is highly militarized because, you know, what else would it be used for? And working in offense often requires making an ethical choice. Hackers might not be necessarily motivated by ethics, but more by the nature of the work. It inspires curiosity and requires creativity. So are there options in cybersecurity to do offense without contributing to cyber warfare or espionage? And if so, what are they? Just some quick asides before we start, because that's a lot. The ethical spectrum for offensive work is subjective. I'm sure it could be argued that some of the companies that I will mention today in this talk hold as much power, if not more, than nation states. It would be impossible for me to unpack all of that in 40 minutes and also stay in the context of this talk. And I'm also not opining on any of the moralities of any of the options. And I'll just leave it at this. There are many reasons why an individual might not be willing or able to work for a nation state or contractors that sell to them. And it's not unusual for hackers to find themselves in unusual or complicated circumstances. And often it has no bearing on their own personal ethical beliefs. It could be as simple as where they were born or where they live. So what this talk is going to do is explore other parts of the industry where offensive security research not only aligns, but plays a defining role in the cybersecurity industry and defines the current state of it. The history of hacking and offensive security research is rich, and even attempting to carve out a small part of it is really complicated, and that this definitely is not that. I'm just going to cover a very brief and focused part of it about the evolution of offensive security as a quote unquote normal job in tech. In 2005, Zero-Day Initiative was started as a way to incentivize researchers to report vulnerabilities to the vendor instead of selling them on the gray or black exploit O-Day market. And ZDI did that by buying the vulnerabilities themselves. This is also around the same time where the pro hackers of the day entered their consulting era, usually coming out of government jobs and trying to market themselves in the private industry to make more money. And in 2007, Pwn to Own was started. Here, hackers participated in hacking contests, owning various targets, and the incentive was a prize that was worth many times the bounty you would have gotten from a vendor. But really, the actual incentive was to drum up publicity for successful hacking attempts. And participating in a contest like Pwn to Own established researchers' reputation in the hacking world, which also happened to be pretty good for business. And by the early 2010s, you started to see the private sector creating and also consuming offensive security research. Companies selling hacking tools for the purpose of penetration testing, for example, though they often had government customers too, don't get me wrong. But even during this time, if you didn't work for yourself, the job opportunities were not many. And in 2014 was when Project Zero was formed, a team of security researchers tasked with finding and demonstrating the exploitability of important vulnerabilities in ripe attack surfaces. And around this time is when public offensive security research got exposure to a mainstream technical audience, not just the hacking scene that consumed zines like Frack and whatever. It was a mainstream technical audience. So software developers and all that were consuming public offensive security research. And around this time, you also started to see companies form teams solely dedicated to offensive security research for various purposes, like auditing their own internal products. And in 2019, Project Zero started their O Day in the Wild initiative to track, analyze, and learn from exploits in the wild. And this was a market move by Google because they were tasking their most hardcore, knowledgeable, and specialized offensive security researchers to do a job that was traditionally before reserved for defensive engineers. And so Project Zero changed the industry in a lot of ways. Of course, they standardized the 90-day disclosure timeline, but it had more impact other than that. Specifically, it had an impact on the types of jobs that were available to do offensive security research. It led the way for tech companies to hire security researchers to do strictly offensive work. This type of specialized, targeted research was now palatable, a normal type of tech job to have. It popularized publishing in-depth blog posts about exploiting vulnerabilities, and it made it more acceptable to publish proof of concepts to demonstrate the impact of certain vulnerabilities. Now, we saw more than just the hacking scene exposed to offensive security research, but even so, security research is poorly understood. I collected a response from a poll of over 4,000 respondents, where most believe that less than 5% of software developers can understand a single Project Zero post. This indicates that there's a large need to bridge the gap between offensive security and software development, and security researchers can lead the way in that effort. So why are security researchers uniquely positioned to bridging this gap? The reason is because offensive security researchers fill every role. They're software developers, reverse engineers, and whatever role that they need to fulfill that day. They're full stack developers, they're network engineers, they're reverse engineers, embedded engineers, and hardware specialists. Technology is always evolving, and offensive security researchers understand that better than anyone else because the nature of their work incentivizes them to do so. But there's simply not enough of them. We're all aware that cybersecurity has a talent gap, but that's especially true for offensive security. In 2016, there were only 800 job listings on LinkedIn for security research positions, compared to over 30,000 job listings today. There's a high demand for these skills, but few are actually leveraging them to their full potential or investing in existing talent to learn them. And there's not currently a really established good way to break into offensive security, particularly if you're already an established adult and don't have time to dedicate to CTFs, networking, or independent research. Contrary to popular belief, there's not actually a high cost of investment to training people for offensive security skills. It's extremely common for skilled hackers to be very young, have little experience, and be self-taught. So that should tell us something. So where does offensive security fit? I'll talk about where opportunities already exist and also where I see offensive security overlap in other subdisciplines in the field and how these skills can be leveraged to better do these jobs. The first one I'll talk about is EDR, or antivirus development. In order to instrument a system and to collect the necessary information needed to detect malware or exploitation techniques, you end up having to do the same type of things that malware does. Developing an EDR is almost indistinguishable to developing a rootkit. EDR and malware/rootkits have sort of a symbiotic relationship when it comes to development. Because in order for EDR to collect the information to detect certain things, the operating system has to make it possible for it to do so, or at least easy, or in a clean, acceptable way. And oftentimes that malware will take advantage of those methods and do the exact same thing as an EDR. And for that same reason, malware development can be very similar to systems programming. In order to exfil or tamper with a system, you have to understand how to interface with it legitimately. And the next that I'll talk about are the most obvious opportunities, which are internal offensive security research teams. I talked about Project Zero earlier, but since the inception of Project Zero, there are many more. They're purely offense, tasked with finding bugs and writing exploits, but they're unleashed on internal products as targets. A good example of this is Google's Android Red Team, where they publish research about attacking at all parts of the stack Android phones, particularly produced by Google. In that same vein are open source offensive security research teams that purely do offensive work, but on open source targets. An example of that is SEML research that was acquired by GitHub Security, and they put out a lot of cool offensive work solely on open source code bases. And they also release exploits. And there's a whole mixture of stuff in between, right? Some focus on targeting internal products, open source, or third-party dependencies, whatever is used internally or externally. But the purpose of these teams is to find vulnerabilities and exploit them before threat actors do. So there's what people sometimes call skunked hacking, which basically just means security research that's meant to garner attention. We've seen companies hire security researchers and release their research to gain publicity. This could be to generate business or establish a positive reputation in the industry. It also works great as personal advertising for those offering trainings or consulting services. And many major discoveries have been disclosed this way or publicized this way, though each source might have their own differing motivations. So the so-called stunt hacking does produce results. Demonstrating the dangerous impact of a vulnerability can definitely spark a reaction. Burning a bug or a technique is a loss of a capability for a threat actor, but a win for defense. And honestly, the best way to kill a technique is to publish it. The next is vulnerability assessment and triage. Okay, so there's this vulnerability. What is the real impact of it? And how bad is it if I don't patch it right now? Evaluating the impact of vulnerability is not trivial. It really comes down to how difficult it is to exploit the vulnerability. Stephen mentioned this earlier in his introduction, but you could have a vulnerability that is rated CVSS 9.8 or whatever, because it's very easy to trigger, but the actual exploit engineering and the likelihood for that vulnerability to be exploited is a whole different story. And there's no one that can truly answer the question of how dangerous a vulnerability is than an exploit developer. There's a big difference between being able to trigger a crash and being able to carefully construct and realize code execution. The difference between denial of service and remote code execution is huge and important. So there are a number of opportunities for offensive security research to inform defense. These jobs are often a hybrid of offensive and defensive skills, but still benefit heavily from offensive skills and expertise and knowledge. One is exploit detection and O-Day detection. There's still very little public transparency on how in the wild O-Days are detected, understandably because threat actors would use that information to evade those detections. But it makes perfect sense that exploit development skills and exploit detection skills completely overlap. Exploit developers deeply understand the unavoidable side effects of exploitation. And then there's malware analysis. Reverse engineering is a crucial skill for both. And there's no better way to understand malware than having written it yourself. There's also creating exploit mitigations. As I said before, knowing and understanding the unavoidable side effects of exploitation gives you the exact perspective needed to understand how to design exploit mitigations that will make an exploit developer's life more difficult. And creating mitigations that will actually have a lasting impact on the impact of exploits. Avoiding futile one-off exploit mitigations that only alter an exploit developer's technique, but don't actually add any additional effort or labor cost is not uncommon. So having offensive security researchers be the ones to design these exploit mitigations is entirely appropriate and needed. There's also vulnerability scanning. And so being able to detect whether a particular system is vulnerable to an arbitrary vulnerability is actually not trivial. And no one understands that better than an exploit developer. They have to fingerprint their target and make sure that their target is not only vulnerable, but will work for their specific versioning of an exploit, because a failed exploit can be catastrophic for an exploit developer, whether that be signaturing a network response or finding a clever way to version some software remotely, or simply collecting and processing OS information locally. Offensive researchers understand what information they need to collect to determine if a system is susceptible to attack. So this next type of work doesn't have enough presence and opportunity right now in defense, but I would like to see that change in the future. So Stephen mentioned in his intro about end-day analysis and patch diffing, and how it's not done enough in a defensive context. Offensive security researchers have the skill to do end-day analysis, which involves performing root cause analysis on end days, which can provide insight on what caused the vulnerability, other places where that vulnerability might also occur, and how to prevent similar bugs in the future. This type of work can be really impactful for some of the jobs I've already mentioned, and offensive security research skills perfectly align with that type of work. Another way offensive security research is currently utilized is within red teams that have dedicated security researchers that come up with novel and cutting edge research to supplement capabilities. And that is the position that I am in today. I am a part of an adversary simulation team. And there are many benefits of implementing custom offensive security research for your red team. If you use novel and more sophisticated techniques, you get caught less. If you have a custom implant, you're less likely to get signatured by EDR. And your tool set will have a much longer lifespan. If you have advanced TTPs, you achieve more of your objectives. And another way is using end-day exploit research to take advantage of gaps in time before systems are patched, which can be lengthy. It can be over a year in some cases. Using end days is almost never as simple as grabbing a public POC off of GitHub, right? We all wish it was. Oftentimes, a public exploit isn't available, or if one is, it needs to be tweaked to work on a particular target. And for that, you need experienced researchers that understand the underlying vulnerability and the exploit primitives. Red team researchers also can conduct internal vulnerability research to elevate the sophistication of the tactics employed by your team, such as utilizing ODay research. Then there's security research as a service. So there are firms that are solely dedicated to auditing code bases for customers. Similarly, there are firms that sell pen testing services to audit applications, web applications. And there's also opportunities to participate in bug bounties, although the success rate in making that sustainable for making a living is low, I'll be honest. It often requires knowledge of which bug bounty programs to target, building relationships with those program managers, and this type of acumen is not necessarily aligned. It has nothing to do with how good of a hacker you are. In that same vein, there's independent consulting, which could mean a lot of things, but basically selling your services as a security researcher. This could include offering trainings, so training people up on offensive security research, doing odd jobs or long-term contracts, one-off exploit development, etc. But it also gives you the opportunity as a researcher to decide who your customers are and who you want to sell to and what your research will be used for. And just to be well-rounded and cover all parts of the spectrum, there are opportunities to do offensive work for private industry that are more nefarious, like working for commercial spyware companies, for example. But as with anything, the marketing and the missions matter. After all, what are the market differences between parental control software and surveillance software? There's not really any in a technical sense, aside from the marketing of the product and the mission of those that produce it and sell it. Earlier, I talked about how EDR development and rootkit development were practically indistinguishable. This can also be applied. It's the marketing, the mission, and how it's applied that matters. The same type of research and the same type of technical skills can be applied to all parts of the ethical spectrum. And of course, we have cybercrime, which I don't find necessary to get into right now, but that's going to be your ransomware, banking malware, etc. You get the idea. And so it wouldn't be a keynote talk in 2023 if I didn't at least mention briefly AI. And where does offensive security fit in a world with AI? Are we all going to be out of a job soon? And so I'm only going to talk about AI in the scope of offensive security research. But if you haven't already, I would strongly recommend watching Aziria's keynote talk. Keynote Black Hat talk from this year when it becomes available for a more broad look at AI and cybersecurity. But I'm going to focus on the offensive parts. So over the last year and a half, there's been an explosion about with buzz about AI because of the release of ChatGPT. And companies are really scrambling to use AI in enterprise. But as we all can anticipate and imagine, this introduces new and complex security consequences that will need to be reckoned with. Deep neural network models like LLMs are still poorly understood by humans. Because their output is not entirely predictable, we have to kind of treat them as a black box for now. And we know those people that have an attacker mindset, like offensive security researchers, to assess attack surfaces, help align these models, and create and test guardrails for them. And these types of jobs have already started to exist. For example, Google and other companies have started AI red teams, and I'm sure more will follow. And the purpose of these jobs are to evaluate and to attack new threat landscapes that AI introduces. And so what about hacking AI? You've most likely heard or seen many jailbreaks breaking chatbots such as ChatGPT, where its safeguards are bypassed and it tells a user how to create a bomb or how to write malware or destroy humanity. And this is done by carefully setting up intricate human-made scenarios that lead the models astray. In practice, though, this technique can be easily thwarted by adding more sophisticated model alignment techniques. But what about programmatically creating jailbreaks for chatbots? Instead of requiring a human to create these intricate scenarios for each attack or request, what about some arbitrary attack that will always work? Well, recently researchers found a series of semantic suffixes to add to the end of a prompt, suffix tokens that caused multiple open and closed source LLMs to affirmatively respond to a request. And it can perform arbitrary destructive actions. So no matter what question you ask the chatbot, these same suffix tokens will result in an affirmative answer from it and give you the instructions on how to do that. And these suffixes don't make any sense in human language, but reliably break all types of LLMs. But we're not just limited to semantic attacks on text input. Also, it applies to images and sounds in multi-model AIs. Recently, researchers at Cornell University published their study on crafting audio and images to elicit a controlled response from an AI. In an example highlighted in the slide, an image is fed to the AI that causes it to output a malicious URL and instructs the user to visit it. Another example, a crafted audio file is fed to an AI, which causes it to only give responses that mention Italy and recommends Italian things. Mamma mia. So for the hackers in this room, this is starting to sound familiar, isn't it? We do exactly this, but in a different flavor. Reverse engineering how a system parses untrusted input of differing formats and altering the intended behavior of the system using that exact control input. You know, doesn't seem that different than finding file parsing vulnerabilities or different media parsing vulnerabilities. And we are very much used to debugging black boxes and dealing with imperfect information sets. Now, in the future, we are preparing and speculating for autonomous AI. Autonomous AI that is allowed to execute extended sequences of instructions. So now you can perfectly imagine a ripe attack surface for a hacker to manipulate the actions of an autonomous AI, much like taking over the instruction pointer register on a CPU. But what about traditional security research? Can AI replace humans and automate the discovery of vulnerabilities in software? Yes and no. There are many security research tasks that can be facilitated with AI models such as LLMs. Tasks that these models are pretty well suited to do. Some examples include reverse engineering, like translating machine instructions into a higher level language, or interpreting and demystifying decompilation output, for example. We can already do that today, and I would encourage any offensive security researchers to take full advantage of that technology to speed up their workflow. It can also used to create harnesses for fuzzers, generating test cases and creating a fuzzing corpus. LLMs are good at understanding protocol grammars, for example. And I think another way that it could be really leveraged is by performing variant analysis. LLMs are really good at detecting patterns in language and also in code. And of course, as with anything, general prompt engineering. Using AI to transform a semantic query written in English into a query for a complicated querying engine like CodeQL, for example, could save an offensive security researcher a bunch of time and make them more efficient. And so AI won't replace the function of offensive security researchers, but it will make them more time efficient and enable them to apply a multiplier to their productivity. And so AI could mean a world where writing a fuzzing harness or even something as simple as creating unit tests or generating unit tests could be essentially free to software developers. And if so, it could become a standard practice to implement these types of things for all software as a type of quality assurance to stomp out surface level bugs prior to release and create a safer world for software. And so, as with anything, the opportunities for offensive security research come down to incentives. Who is paying hackers and why? What is the target for the research? And historically, nation states and those that sell to them are the most incentivized to invest in offensive security research and have the resources to do so. But I'm arguing that in the last 10 years, there has been a marked shift in who produces offensive security research and who consumes it. Throughout this talk, I've highlighted a number of different avenues in which offensive security research is important, and its relevancy will only continue to increase in the years to come. And there's a multitude of opportunities and flavors where offensive security research is directly applied. I didn't even have time to talk about the types of cybersecurity jobs where offensive security skills only slightly or partially overlap with the job description, but there are many. And in my opinion, the demand for offensive security research skills is large enough to sustain the ability for talented researchers to be able to pick stimulating jobs that align with their own personal goals, motivations, and circumstances. Hackers are curious, creative, and tenacious, and their power should be fostered and leveraged to their maximum potential. And so the bottom line for companies: invest in training and hiring offensive security researchers, allow existing cybersecurity and tech talent the opportunities to learn and apply offensive security skills to their jobs, and it will see fruitful results. And so the bottom line for aspiring security researchers or those that want to work in offense, there are a lot of options for the type of work that you can do once you acquire the skill set. And there are a lot of differing paths to get there, even if they're not conventional. And I'm pretty much certain that learning offensive skill sets does position you for a long-term success in this industry. It's never going to go away. That's all I got. Thank you so much for being here and listening to me speak today.